Hello and welcome to another video with Gardening for Beginners. Today's a beautiful day. It's December 2018. I came in here into my greenhouse to check out some peppers that I've pruned and overwintered, and I figured today would also be a good day to talk about trench composting. Trench composting is what it sounds like. There's not a lot of mystery behind it. You essentially dig a hole, drop compostable materials in it, and then bury it. That being said, I want to stress that it's a pretty effective way for nourishing your soil and thus nourishing your plants. It's also the perfect time of year to do it, where we've got a little bit of time, a lot of us do, where you've got some time almost in between growing seasons. So it's just a nice little way just to kind of wedge in some additional composted material into your soil while you wait for the spring growing season. Before we get started, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button in the lower right hand corner of this video. And with that said, let's talk about trench composting. So before we get started, you may be asking, especially if you've seen my video on free compost materials, you may be asking why somebody like me would use a process like trench composting when I already have a couple of compost bins that I use for my garden. Really, there's going to be three reasons. Number one, it's a quick and easy way of enriching the soil below the surface. So my compost bins are nice because they're portable. I've got one right here. I can take it out into the garden, roll it around, and dump compostable material in there. That being said, I only add compost to the surface, to enrich the soil at the surface layer. Also, if and when it gets cold, I want the worms, that are beneath the surface to have something to eat during the colder months. And it is a really good way to help aerate the soil beneath the surface and to increase worm casting production. Number two, it's an effective way to prepare the soil in areas that you won't be using for a couple of months. My winter planting is not as ambitious as my spring and my summer planting, so I have a little bit more extra space to spare in the garden. Trench composting helps me prepare the soil for when I get a little crazier with my planting, later on in the spring and the summer. Excuse me. And three, I trench compost with stuff that I wouldn't normally put in one of my portable composters, because again, if you've seen my video on free composting, I like to put materials in there that will break down in 4 to 8 weeks. With my trench composting, I'll put materials in there that might take a little bit longer to compost, because time is definitely on my side. I've got a couple of months before I'll be using certain areas of my garden, and this is a good way to put materials in there that take a little bit longer to break down in there, and I'm still making use out of those materials. Some of the items that I would put in a trench compost that I would not put in my compost bins are going to be things like eggshells, banana peels, leaves, and I also use materials that I would normally use in my bin, but maybe I have a surplus of them and they're taking up space. A couple of examples here are going to be things like shredded cardboard. I've got some shredded cardboard that I used that are a little bit longer than what I would normally put in my compost bin. I'm also going to be using some extra coffee grounds that I've had laying around in the garage. So you'll want some gloves, your compostable material. Right there I've got some eggshells, 125 eggshells to be exact. Yes, I counted them. I also have some rotten banana peels, spoiled cantaloupe. I'd also mentioned having some shredded cardboard as well as some shredded newspaper products. There's also some paper towels that had fallen on the floor and just extra toilet paper at the end of rolls. Just stuff that I couldn't use. And of course, spading fork
and a shovel are going to be necessary as well. I also wanted to show you, I like to crush my eggshells up. I just use something sturdy. Like here I have about a half-gallon pot, and just crush them up a little bit. Gives it a little more surface area. But the main reason that I do it, and you can see right there, it breaks them down a little bit. The main reason that I do it is it's a lot easier to evenly distribute them in the trench compost when you break them down a little bit. As you can see here, I have a piece of cardboard laid down. I've had it laid down for, I don't know, about 6 to 8 weeks. It just kills the grass, makes it a little easier to work with the soil. Before I start working the soil over with a spading fork, I also like to pull up any, stray pieces of dead grass. It just makes it easier to work the soil. You can also use that dead grass in the trench compost, so nothing really goes to waste. And it looks like we got a little bee there, very interested in what's going on. I find it interesting that there's a bee hanging around in December, which I think is great. I personally think he was attracted to the spoiled cantaloupe. So right here I'm working the soil with a spading fork. It's just a nice way to turn the soil over before you come in with your shovel to actually pull the soil out. Right about here, you'll notice the fork only goes about halfway in. Another nice thing about tilling the soil is it's an easy way to find rocks. And I hadn't quite figured out why it wasn't going in all the way just yet, but you can see me working away right there, trying to figure it out. There's actually a rock about the size of, just a little bit smaller than a baseball, that got wedged in between the a couple of the I guess you would call them arms of the spading fork, and that's when I make my discovery right there and realize there's a huge rock wedged in there, which is really preventing me from getting really deep into the soil. Okay, so after about 30 seconds of frustration, I decide to take matters into my own hands with a gardening claw. And I'm just trying to work that rock out. It's in there really good. And what I end up doing is just kind of using this in an unattended way to just knock that rock out right there. And you can see how big this rock is. It's just a little bit smaller than a baseball. And I've actually been using this area of the garden for, I don't know, maybe at least 3 years, and I've never found that rock before. So it's just another example on how turning the soil over can really help you find debris that maybe you've missed in previous seasons. Another thing that you'll be able to observe as you are using the spading fork on the soil is the amount of worm activity in your soil. And there's really 2 different types of worm activity I want to talk about. There's earthworm and nightcrawler activity, which is great. You want to keep those guys. You want to make sure those guys stay in your soil, and you want to keep an eye out for them, because the more worm activity that you have in there, the better. Now, another type of worm activity you want to be on the lookout for is grubworm activity. These guys are bad, okay? They chew on your roots, they can harm your plants. You want to throw those guys in the neighbor's yard. Just kidding. It's not my neighbor's yard. That's a side of the yard that has a lot of birds around it. So I'm just helping them out right there. Once you're done loosening the soil up with the spading fork, you'll want to come in with your shovel. And right here I like to just get as much of the little bits off as possible. Waste not, want not. But now that we've got that complete, the next step is to come in with your shovel and to start turning the soil out with it. So this is where we actually create our trench. and just move it off to the side, wherever it's convenient. Just find little spots here and there, because once we're done digging our trench, we'll start laying our compostable materials inside. One thing I noticed when I was turning the shovel over is there were some dead roots from maybe previous trees or occupants that had been there. Like the rock I found after digging through this, who knows how many times. But if you see any roots like that, just go in there, pull them out. It's going to impede growth, especially from a lot of root vegetables. Then I like to go in there, once I've done turning over the soil, or turning out the soil with the shovel, I like to go in there and just by hand clear out any additional debris so that I get a nice, even trench down there. One thing I would have done differently with this is I would have dug a little bit deeper. This trench is about 8 to 10 inches deep. I usually like to go 12, at least 12, but preferably about 18 inches deep, so that you get those nutrients deep down into the soil. But I'm happy with this, and I think it's going to work well. Now we come in with our compostable materials. I don't know that the order is necessarily required or anything, but first I'm just laying down a layer of those eggshells that I crushed up, and I'm just getting an even layer in here. I specifically wanted to use eggshells for this spot because I'm more than likely going to put my peppers here for the spring season, and I know that one of the things they need is calcium. Next, I'm going to put in some rotten bananas that I'd left too long on the counter, as well as some of their peels that I've been saving over the course of the last few weeks. It's not the cleanest job in the world, as you can see, so you definitely want to use your gloves for this part. I also have some rotten veggies, just a combination of celery, cilantro, stuff that I just either couldn't use or that had spoiled. Also some more dried banana peels. I also had some peppers, some California Wonder peppers that had rotted, but I decided to leave those in the bag at the last second because, number one, I didn't dig that trench as deeply as I usually do, around 18 inches. But also, I didn't want any volunteer pepper plants to come through here for the next season. And here we've got even more dried banana peels. The more the merrier, right? And right here is the portion of the celery that I couldn't use that I was talking about. Next we have the shredded cardboard and newspaper. Just going to spread this out fairly evenly throughout the trench itself. Again, it's not an exact science. Just like to have it evenly distributed to help with the diversity in the soil. And there are those napkins, paper towels, toilet paper that had fallen on the floor, or for example with the toilet paper, it was in such a small amount that I couldn't use it for what it's normally intended for. Next we have the spoiled cantaloupe. Cantaloupe was fairly easy to work with. It was still partially frozen. It spoiled a number of months ago, but I had it in the freezer. So I'm just breaking it apart, spreading it evenly in the trench itself. Again, not really a job you want to do without gloves. Here are the coffee grounds, the extra coffee grounds that I had in the garage that were just kind of collecting dust and starting to get moldy. So I decided to use these in here as well. Coffee grounds are something that worms really enjoy to eat. Also black soldier fly larvae, which are really good at breaking down soil, are other fans of coffee grounds. And when you're going through the coffee grounds, make sure you keep an eye out for little plastic things like that cup lid right there. Sometimes they accidentally make it into the coffee grounds. Normally, I would crush up the pucks, they're called, the coffee ground pucks from places like Starbucks. But right here, I'm not really worried about it. Again, just evenly distributing the coffee grounds into the soil to provide an even medium for anything that's hungry. And last but not least, I collected some leaves from 2 oak trees that I have in the front yard. Just going to put this on top as another layer. Leaves like this are very nutritious and they really help with the diversity of the soil. So I'm just going to layer those on top just as a final piece of material. And next we just cover the trench. Again, there's no mystery behind this. I'm using a shovel right here. Another useful tool that you can use is a gardening hoe or a gardening spade, to where you can just use the flat edge to it to push this in. Probably a little easier than the way I'm pushing it in right now. Couple more grub worms there to feed the bellies of bluebirds. Now that we have buried the compost in the trench, it's time to cover it back up. You can water this. It's an option. That being said, we've had a lot of rain recently, so I'm just going to lay this back down. And I'm going to make sure that there aren't any little holes peeking through for weeds to get through or anything like that. And I'm very careful with it too, because this thing's almost composted itself. And as a finishing touch, I'm putting an old leaky garden hose on top of it, just to make sure that the wind doesn't blow it away, because we have been experiencing some pretty high winds as of late.
So there you have it. In a few months, the worms and microorganisms in the soil are going to break down the material and provide usable nutrients for my plants, which in turn will give me a better harvest. If you enjoyed this video, please click the like button below and also click the subscribe button to subscribe to our channel. That way you'll get future updates. Also, please join our Facebook group, Gardening for Beginners. I'll provide a link for that in the description. Thank you very much and happy gardening.